So today we are going to be talking about injuries. So injuries are kind of that unavoidable thing that will happen to everyone in some manner or another, whether you work out or not. People think often if they don't work out, they might avoid them, but you're going to get a different type of injuries from staying seated too long or something of that nature. So though they are not entirely avoidable, there are certain things you can do to help speed up your recovery and also avoid them in the future from being as damaging as they could be. So the first thing to do is when you get an injury is to take at least a week off. Depending on the nature of the injury, sometimes you can work around it. But if it is from a more central part of the body, then often you have to completely avoid re-injuring it for at least a week. And during this time, you're going to want to kind of determine the nature of the injury. Receive a diagnosis from a proper specialist or family doctor or something like that if you can. And, determine its severity. And then you can go further from there. So with injuries, there is two different categories I'm going to talk about, and that is acute and overuse injuries. So acute injuries are something you see a little bit more often in extreme sports, and that is an injury occurring from one traumatic event. And this is always going to be more prevalent when you're trying to push the envelope or push to the next level up your whatever skill it is you're trying to do. So I myself am just recovering from one of these. I actually broke my rib from doing a precision jump from one railing to another. And I guess you're not supposed to land on your ribs. Learned that out the hard way. And it was quite a high fall. But so that's why I haven't been active for a little while, because I'm getting through it right now. But I'm pretty much all good now, so I'm in the recovery process myself. So these are the scarier looking ones, especially in videos and stuff like that. They're not always as bad as they may seem. A broken bone heals pretty well as long as it's set properly and you don't re-aggravate the injury for long enough. It will set itself. So joint injuries are the ones that are a little bit more complicated, especially if surgeries are needed. The scar tissue complicates things, and often the joint will never be quite as strong as it used to be. So with my rib injury when I had it, basically because it was so centralized to most movements, I pretty much had to end up taking a full month off. And though this sets you back in what progress you've made, and you will become a little bit weaker and you might lose progress in some of the skills, it's better to take the necessary time off than it is to constantly set yourself back and then make a short-term injury become a long-term problem. So I took the month off. I waited till I knew that the bones were stitched together and I was able to regain my activity. I lost kind of my handstand push-up to some degree. It became much more inconsistent, and my side lever definitely was suffered a little bit, because that is very much directly the muscles that are related to, or your intercostal muscles, and kind of a lot of pressure on the ribs. So I did lose progress in that. So once you've achieved something once, it is much easier to learn it again. The learning curve is much shallower, and your body remembers how to do it. It just takes going through the motion a few more times and building up some of that strength, maybe losing a little bit of the weight that you might have put on during the recovery process. That's pretty common. But with acute injuries, just make sure that you're receiving the proper coaching and you're not just going for something all balls, no knowledge, because you'll end up in bad situations, right? It's good to be confident and brave about certain things, but you have to make sure you take the proper steps to prepare for that situation. I probably should have known that I wasn't ready for the level of precision that I did. It was probably about 10 feet or 8 feet in the air maybe, and I'm still working on a much lower level. Maybe 3 to 4 feet off the ground is about where I'm at, where I can probably safely bail without injuring myself. So I probably shouldn't have taken it that far. It was in a group setting, so that often will push you a little bit outside your comfort zone. But like, again, making sure that you're ready to push outside of your comfort zone. You have the necessary skills and the necessary ability to make that next jump. A lot of people jump too soon, and that's kind of the consequences that you'll face if you do that. The next kind of injury is overuse injury, and though they seem more minor most of the time, oftentimes they take longer to heal. And that is because the nature of them is harder to diagnose what the exact problem is a lot of the times. So I myself have one of these as well. I have tendonitis in the tricep area connecting to my elbow right about here, and I'm not exactly sure what is the cause of it. I think it's an old wrestling injury, or it could have been the hand-to-hand practice I was doing is when it was the most aggravated. But I'm trying to fix it, and it's definitely not as streamlined as the ribs. The ribs happened way after and have fixed themselves way before this injury is still bothering me. So there's usually 3 reasons why you get an overuse injury. The first one is pattern overload. So that is just the wear and tear of the repetition of a movement. Even if you are doing it right, this can still happen. Just as even if you drive a car well, parts will need to get replaced. Distance runners or endurance sports often see this the most. Marathon runners with shin splints or stress fractures or things of that nature, or even just like worn out knee cartilage and stuff like that. That is a little bit harder to fix, and generally what you would want to do is make sure that you're doing enough cross training and variety in your activity so that you're not just, you know, doing the same thing over and over. And then also making sure that you're strengthening the other areas that you don't necessarily use specifically in your sports, just to make sure you don't have any imbalances. And that is number 2, imbalances. So with imbalances, they kind of naturally come along when you are more of a specialist, or your attention is dedicated to one specific area of a sport, or you're trying to achieve one certain skill. Imbalances will come along with it. So the best way to handle that is to take a step back and do some kind of deconstruction of your patterning. See what you're doing the most, and make sure you train in the opposite areas, and you kind of look at the body as a whole, as a machine, and make sure that there's kind of equal movement, equal strength in all different planes, all different ranges of motion, and make sure there's not like one area that's holding you back. Oftentimes, if there's one area that's a little bit more immobile, then other areas around it will be hypermobile. So they're actually the ones that are going to see the overuse injuries, because they're compensating for immobility in certain areas. So making sure that you're stretching that immobile area, or if you have one muscle that is much stronger than some of the supporting muscles in the same movement, then they'll compensate for the other ones, and eventually they might wear out or something will happen to them. So making sure that you isolate those weak links in the chain and get them up to par. And the last one is improper patterning. So this can be a few different things. Oftentimes you are going to do something wrong for a little while before you do it right. So making sure that you're not training with high volume at the start of learning something, right? So really making sure that you're worried about the mechanics until that is done, then you can pack on the volume a little bit harder. And also making sure that you have a qualified coach that can pick out when you are doing something wrong. Because if you're just trying to grind out reps and teach yourself something, this is when this can happen. So this is one of the issues of learning skills off YouTube or something like that, which I've done myself. Sometimes you can be grinding out something wrong, and one, you're ingraining the improper pattern, so it's going to be harder to relearn, and 2, you're opening up for more overuse injuries. So with my Webster flip, I was landing wrong because I wasn't jumping enough into it, so I was landing low, and that put extra stress on my knees, and I was starting to see the beginning of an overuse injury. So I took off the pressure and found a better way to train it, and received some coaching on it as well. And with overuse injuries, I always recommend see a proper professional. So that's usually a physiotherapist or something of that nature. That is what they do. That is their specialty. So they can help you find the right exercises, find the right causes of it, and find the right imbalances so that you can work on it on your own, right? So even if it's not all your rehabilitation is done through the physiotherapist, they're a good place to start, and they can help you on your journey. And it's always worth the investment so that you don't have to worry about it for many more years to come. After we understand the injuries, the important thing is preventing injuries from happening in the future. It's all well and good while you're not injured, but if you continually get injured again, eventually you're going to be disheartened. So the first step of preventing injuries is something I kind of already touched on, and that is learning the proper mechanics. So one, receiving the proper coaching, make sure you understand the movement totally, but also making sure that you just understand proper biomechanics and human movement as it pertains to you. So Becoming a Supple Leper, a book that I've talked about before, is something that I recommend. It's a good place to start. Kind of teaches you general principles that you can follow through other activities, whatever it may be, and a proper alignment of certain joints and stuff like that. I recommend that and the other similar books around. Make sure you understand where your body is supposed to be lined up, how you're supposed to hit things optimally, and then it's easier to kind of transition into other skills and translate that information into whatever it is, whatever discipline you're wanting to do in the future. And the second one is preparing your joints for the inevitability of going outside of that proper range of motion. So if you're doing any sort of activity or sports, it's kind of, especially ones that are involving other people, something like football or something where there's contact, or basketball where you have to react to each other, you are going to go outside of the proper range of motion. So making sure that your joints are properly conditioned to be able to handle that stress whenever it does happen. Ido Portal talks about this quite a bit with his corset protocol, but it's just gradually building up the strength in whatever tendons and small tissues that are going to be supporting your joints, right? They take a little bit longer than your muscles to build up, so you have to be more patient and making sure you're not overdoing it and getting overzealous and trying to do something that looks cool before the tissues are properly prepared. They do this quite a bit in gymnastics and martial arts as well. Lots of good information out there. Make sure to look it up. But yeah, that is basically all I have for you today. Appreciate you for joining me back again. And thank you. A lot of big changes for me in the last couple months. So I'm looking forward to making more content for you in the future. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video if you did like the video, and turn on notifications because my upload schedule will vary. My whole schedule just got flipped around, so I might not be able to post as frequently as I was before, so make sure you receive the notifications for when I do. Thank you, and have a good one.